of Lot as we pick up the story. The ironic part about going by the airport more than once, sometimes we do that in life. Sometimes we're the pilot. Sometimes we're the one that's missing the right speed and we're missing the right approach and we have the angle wrong. Right? You have days like that where you're trying to figure out how is this going to work out. And it could be because you blew it, or it could be because someone else blew it, or it could be because we all blew it together.
Amen.
Because there are passengers on your plane.
That's true.
Your life has passengers. Every single, no matter how much of a loner you might be, your life has passengers. And it has an effect. There's something that occurs as a result of what you do in every circumstance. Yesterday, I won't tell you the story, what occurred. All I can tell you is that what the adventure my son and I went on, we could have written a book already about that one day, and it would have been a sizable book. It was one of those days where just every step you take, there's an unknown thing that is like we call Murphy's Law, that comes at you from the side, and as soon as you've figured out one of them, you've no longer taken a breath, and the next one is nailing you.
Amen.
And as a result, we got home about 2:30 this morning, after not really sleeping for a couple days prior to that. So if I start slurring my words, I'm not having a stroke. I'm probably starting to go to sleep. That's probably what's going on. A little bit, yeah. So let's go to Genesis chapter 19. And let's pick up the story. Now I want you to remember in the story as we read last week that the angels had taken Lot's hand and he had taken his family's hands and he said, go to the mountains. And Lot says, no, I don't want to go to the mountains because trouble will catch up to me there. Right? Okay, so he's having anxiety. Don't go to Maui. Trouble will catch up to you there. That's what the problem was, Nicole. You were going to Maui. It doesn't matter where you're going. Because of the environment that we have, as Nicole had shared in Revelation chapter 12, there's an enemy that is relentless. Not because he's solely fixated upon you, it's because he is fixated upon wanting to be God. And so he wants to have influence and power, and the tool that he uses is, well, there's a bunch of them, but one of the primary ones is when he accuses you, he can bring about a situation where now you have a sense of guilt, even if you're not guilty. When you have accusation, you start even wondering, did I do it? Even if maybe you didn't. He's relentless. And he wants you to come into that place where you have a sense of condemnation, which he can bring in fear. And ultimately, he wants to rule by fear, because then he can get us to do all kinds of things.
That's why focus is so important.
In fear.
That's why focus, yeah. Amen.
And that's why that testimony this morning is so powerful, because rather than focusing upon the origin of that fear,
You focus on it.
Nicole focused upon Jesus Christ.
Amen.
So here's Lot. Lot's going against the instruction and counsel of the ones that came to save him. Think about what a great idea that is. Somebody is coming to you, let's say that someone's called 911 and you're having a medical emergency, and the ambulance shows up, and you start telling the paramedics, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm the one having the heart attack, you don't know what you're saying. Or whatever it is. Whatever the emergency is, and they're trying to take all of their training, all of their expertise, all of the things that they have so that they can somehow mitigate on your behalf. And you're saying, no way.
Do not resuscitate.
Right? So Lot, the irony as we read the next part of this story, we're just going to pick up a short piece of it today. I know you're thinking, when are we going to ever get out of Genesis? Because you're so excited about getting to Leviticus, right? You guys are all waiting for that phase. All right? You have to all still come, all right? Leviticus is going to be fun. So, here's the irony. He goes to this little town, and we all know it's called Zor, meaning little place. And so let's go ahead and pick it up here in verse 30. So Genesis 19 and verse 30. So Abraham, he had seen the Lord's work, and now we're picking up the story. God was faithful in the petition that Abraham had on behalf of those that would be willing to be led out by God. In verse 30 it says, afterward Lot left the little place. He left Zor. Listen why he left. He left because he was afraid. He said, I can't go to the place where God told me to go because trouble will catch up to me, so he's afraid. He's afraid of doing what God is asking him to do. He pleads with God and says, okay, you can do it the way you want to do it. And then ultimately, in that place that he had asked God to allow for his life, he finds that the thing that he chose created fear. Man, if I could just trust God the first time around and land the plane, the first approach.
Yes.
Are any of you like me? Where you keep seeing them going, wow, those terminals are looking a little closer than normal.
Amen.
It's kind of like that time when you have a thought in your mind and it's starting to come out of your mouth and your mind has second thoughts, but the second thoughts came later. And you're going, this is a bad idea. Right? And then it proves to be true.
Right. Then it rings over in your head.
It does. And then often what happens with that, because we're so frustrated with the fact that we had our second thought too late, then we complicate it with third and fourth thoughts. And there's a point in time where you may as well just go, okay, I'm just going to sit in this place quietly for just a moment. And let's see what God might do with the mess that I made. Right? God absolutely does a work. My day yesterday, I have no idea what it was about. I have no idea why all the things occurred that occurred, but I know that someday it probably will come to me and I'll know why. It was so random and weird and crazy and and we just got to the point where we just sitting there along the freeway laughing.
Yeah.
Just laughing. Like, I hope that puddle of gas does not find a spark. But in God, there's no fear. The only place there is fear is in the influence of the enemy. You will not experience fear except for that we allow the influence of the enemy to give it to us. Because we all know the verse very clearly in Scripture that says that perfect love, which we know to be God Himself, casts out fear. In other words, if fear and God are in the same room, one of them has to leave.
Amen.
Which one do you want to stay?
God.
That's our choice.
Amen.
And I'm not saying fear isn't real. I'm not saying that there aren't circumstances that actually are real, tangible, where you can say, oh my word, this is really a challenging circumstance. I'm not diminishing that at all. There are things that are uncertain. There are things that come about our path that would seem to threaten everything in our very being. And for me personally, the ones that are the least challenging are the ones that are tangible that you can see, but when the spiritual things come, that's when we have to have the discernment from the Spirit that God gave us.
Amen.
So, Lot's afraid. He was just rescued. Seen the incredible way that God intervened on his behalf. He was the recipient of mercy. He was the recipient of grace. His life was spared. In other words, almost you could say his life was restored because it was as good as gone. And I don't know if he celebrated when he first got to Zoar or not. It doesn't say that. It just says he went to Zoar. It says Abraham was pleased that God had kept his word, which, duh. Right? Of course God keeps his word. And so, he falls right back into, just watch God save me. And now I'm afraid because I'm lacking faith that he can take care of me again. So it's really kind of funny. That sounds familiar. Wow. I was saying my voice sounds different.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Oh, you got an app or something where you change my voice? Yeah. That's a better voice. I like that one. Sweeter.
Yes.
So while we were waiting there along the road for one of our little stints, this was the 5-hour one on I-90. And this young kid came out. It was all because of my bad planning. I didn't bring a lug wrench. Right? I fully bear that responsibility. I did not bring a lug wrench. And when you travel 7 or 8 hours to go get a used car for your son, and you've never driven it before, and then you're going to drive it 500 miles home, it'd be good to have a lug wrench, right? It'd be a good idea, generally. Yeah. I didn't, and so he calls me on the phone, and yes, Diane, he was driving. And so was I in the other car. And I'm on the phone with Simona. And I go, hey, hon, I really need to go. Roman's calling us. Something's probably going on. And he goes, Dad, the rig is vibrating like crazy. And then I see rubber flying everywhere. As I'm looking in the rearview mirror. So I started laughing. I mean, that's what a good dad does, right? Turns out the spare tire had a slit in the stem, so Diane might know something about that. And then the little single-use lug wrench that is in my other car is a one size and the wrong size. So they send out this young guy, and we get out to greet him because we're excited to see him because it's been a long time we've been waiting. And I called in, I just called AAA and I said, I just need a lug wrench. That's all I need, I just need a lug wrench. You know, we're 30 miles from that exit, and we're 30 miles from that one. I just need a lug wrench. That's it. And of course, if you saw Roman and I along the road, you wouldn't stop, would you? Guy shows up with a, I don't know, 12-ton floor jack. We had pushed this is a little Suzuki Samurai we got for him. It weighs 1,800 pounds. You know, I probably could have picked it up while Roman changed the tire. I don't know, they're little tiny things. So we get out and go greet the guys. He shows up and I'm gonna help him. Sir, it's dangerous out here along the road. He looks like he's 12. I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask you to get back in the other vehicle and I'll handle this.
He just graduated school, didn't he?
So then he comes over and he knocks on the window. And the problem is that he comes on the traffic side, not the other side. So, you know, teaching me things. So we had pushed Roman's vehicle off, so it was off on the gravel side. So there was about 10 feet between the tire that needed to be changed and traffic. So we had a nice. It's too dangerous to change a tire when one side is on gravel and the other is on pavement. So he has us push the vehicle back, but we were supposed to be in our vehicle. I don't know how that was supposed to work. Anyway, but now it's okay for us to get out of our vehicle. We push his car back up right to the rumble strip is where he wants it. So when he's got the handle for his jack, it's going 2 feet out into traffic. And then he's laying down there with his head on the rumble strips and stuff, and I'm like, what in the world is happening here? This is amazing. He takes the jack and he jacks it up enough that, just enough that the flat blowing out tire. I mean, there's like the steel cores in it are all, you know, looks like rebar when a building gets blown up or whatever. It's just shredded. And so it's sitting low and he pumps it up just high enough to get that tire off, and then he can't figure out why the new one won't go on. And he goes, it doesn't fit. So we had told him, we said, the stem is leaking on this one. If you would just, it wasn't leaking real bad. We needed to get 34 miles to Les Schwab. He said, you have a pump on your rig, just put air in it. We can make it 34 miles. I'm sorry, sir, it's too dangerous for you to drive on that tire with a stem that's leaking. I'm going to have to call the tow truck for you. So he takes his lug wrench and leaves. An hour goes by. And I thought, I don't want to question this young man's ability, but I think I'm going to call AAA one more time and just see. And they said, well, I thought your issue had been resolved. If I hadn't called, we'd still be there now. And I said, well, Les Schwab's going to close in about an hour and a half. I don't know where your tow truck's coming from, but we can't get there. We're there till 8 a.m. this morning, right? And sure enough, here comes a guy with a truck that Paul and Sue's bus would fit on.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, they sent the big guns out.
For little Suzuki.
And he said, you drive ahead and go buy the tires and I'll be there in time. So he loads it all up, Sure enough, as we were pulling into Les Schwab, he pulled in right behind us. He was flat moving. My point in sharing that story is there's so many perspectives in that, isn't there? So many different things to learn from it. The ultimate thing that I have to learn from it is this, though. Meanwhile, while I'm looking at this 12-year-old teaching me, he actually is. Right?
Yes.
And so, when it comes right down to the end, I was talking to my son, and he goes, Dad, I thought about going and getting a lug wrench when we were leaving this morning, but I decided not to. And I told him, I said, I thought about putting one in the car last night, but I just didn't. We've had like 3 of them sitting there by the door at home. I mean, it's a hillbilly place. That's where you store them. By the door. Some of you have been there, you know.
The Holy Spirit speaks to us, we just don't listen.
The reason I was in that circumstance ultimately was not because the tire blew out. That happens. It was because I did not put a lug wrench into the car.
You didn't listen to that wee small voice.
That's it.
Thank God.
That's it. That's accountability right there. Thank you, sister.
Because we want to do it our way.
That's right. God told Lot to go to the hills. I don't want to. I'm too tired to bend down and reach that extra 12 inches to pick up a lug wrench this morning to put it in the car. I don't want to. Or whatever it is, it doesn't matter in our life, whatever it is. But the thing is in this story, we see that God never abandons. Even as next week when we get into the story where it gets real bad, we're getting into unthinkable territory. We're getting into bad redneck joke territory. Right? But God doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. We ended up meeting a new friend at Les Schwab. He was awesome. I think we're going to stay in contact with him. In fact, I might even take a special trip to go back and see him. His name is Randy. God is good in everything.
Amen, all the time. Always on time, too.
Okay, I told you I was going to share the story, but there's another part. There's many parts, but the next one was we got to Les Schwab. We drive a mile past the last exit before there's another 30 miles without an exit. And Roman says he needs to adjust something. I think the top on his rig or whatever. And I go, okay, whatever. I'm irritated because I'm like, let's just go home. Ready. Now, Suzuki Samurais have 67 horsepower. And if you were to take a piece of 4x plywood and put it in front of you on a windy day and hold it vertical like that and run as fast as you can, that's about like what a Samurai is. So, when there's no headwind, 55 is a good speed. I'm a Cardwell. So is he. So this is hard. I'm on the phone with Ted. Where's Ted?
He's hiding confused.
Ted and I have been playing phone tag because I've got this weird stuff happening all day. He wanted to talk about an elders meeting and stuff, and I'm like, yeah. I'm watching, in the rearview mirror, I'm watching gas pouring out of the bottom of Roman's car. And I'm like, Ted, I need to go. And he's like, yeah, but we need to talk about hey, there's a thing happening. He has no idea, but there's a thing that's going on. I don't have a screwdriver, I don't have a wrench.
Oh, no.
I have a bag of chips. So he's coming over, Roman sees it, and he's flailing his arms around, and I'm like, it's like, there's all this animation and stuff, and I'm, Ted, okay, we'll talk later, and I'll call you later. I hope. Like, anyway. So, get out of the car and I go back there, and I go, well, you know, it's good to turn it off. Let's not keep pumping gas out on the ground. And so, the rig gets turned off. And somebody had done a great thing to give it more than 67 horsepower. They put a Weber carburetor on it, but they put all of the hoses on without plans. And the one that's at the bottom that's the hardest to get to, that you have to tear part of the assembly off the firewall and remove the battery and all of that in order to get to it, that's the one. And I have a bag of chips.
Rough one doesn't have it.
So I call Randy at Les Schwab that we just met. And I go, Randy, do you have some small hose clamps? He's like, I think so. And I go, it may be 60 miles before I get there. I know you're closing in like 3 minutes. But there's an exit that way. I don't want to drive the wrong way on the freeway. I've been told that's bad. And so we can, anyway, so we jump in the vehicle. And I'm going to go back to Les Schwab. And I know Randy's a good guy. And I know he'll hang out there with the hose clamps for me. I don't know how we're going to put them on. I think Doritos would break off when you're So I see this place in the median, but they're on Highway 395. The southbound lane is down here, and the northbound lane is up here. And there's a median with a dip in it. And I'm in the little Nissan Versa. You know, it's a little heavier and a little more powerful than the Samurai, but not much. And Roman's going, Dad, you can make it. So immediately in my mind, as our day has been going, I'm thinking, okay, this is what's going to be next. There's going to be a whole thing with the Versa stuck in the middle of two highways and whatever, but I'm just going, I'm gunning it, let's go for it. And we popped back up off the top of that other side, and yes. Randy was waiting there for us with 3 clamps. And he said, do you have any way of putting them on? And I said, absolutely not. He goes, here's a screwdriver. Give me a screwdriver. And I go, thank you. I told Roman, I said, I think we're going to need more than a screwdriver. So we found a gas station and we bought some they're like those, you know, I don't know, like those toys that you used to find at Toys R Us, those toy tool sets or whatever, depending on the plastic handles that bend when you try to do anything with them and stuff. And so we got a couple things like that. We went back down there, and I'll tell you how good God is. Roman locked his keys in the car.
Get a lug wrench again,
We had a day. I'm telling you a couple of things. We're parked right in a spot where a few years before we drove into like what was like a tornado. And so we're remembering this part of the road, and all of a sudden the black clouds are coming and they're blowing towards us, and I'm going, Roman, like, look at this. This is the best ever. And it's starting to get dark now, and anyway, turns out the guy that put the Weber on didn't know how to get the right size fuel lines either, because the fuel line was too small. That's why it popped off. And so I'm like, how are we going to get that on there? We have nothing to stretch it with. We have nothing. And I go, oh, I always care, because I have lots of sinus issues. I always carry Vicks vapor rub. Praise God for Vicks vapor rub. I greased that thing up. Yeah. God is so good. Man, he just gives us example after example after example that the complications of our decisions, that he will provide a creative way. Sometimes.
Even if you got to have sinuses to get them.
So at 2:30, we took said little 4x8 sheet of plywood vehicle and we pulled into the driveway, and Simona was sticking her head out the window going, "That's a nice rig." My dad has always wanted one. He wants to drive it. Have fun. So he's afraid. I mean, he's got circumstances. He's afraid.
Maybe I can buy a cat now.
Probably so. I share that because no matter what it is, God's got your back. I mean, the things I've gone through in my head, it's when I'm done here today, I'm doing a wedding. I'm thinking about what's my excuse going to be. What's it going to be why I couldn't be at the wedding? Maybe I could get your pilot to come and get me and fly me there. But God has always got your back. He's got lots back here. He didn't need to be afraid in Zor, but he heads off into the mountain. And next week we're going to talk about that hillbilly fun. Or whatever you call it, whatever we call it. For right now, go with me to 2 Timothy, if you will. 2 Timothy is something that we should read again and again. 2 Timothy chapter 1, and so Paul was, you can see his emotion towards Timothy. It says they were shedding tears as Paul was leaving. That's a pretty significant relationship. I mean, I once nose kissed a man, or he nose kissed me because he was, what kind, was he from Samoa? Honey? Anyway, we were at the Polynesian Cultural Center, and I got chosen to be the guest to come up. And that was a very impersonal kiss. What was he, Samoan? Tongan? Where we had to rub our noses. We had to rub our noses together, and I was like, "What is happening here?" I don't know what is happening. I kind of liked him, but I wasn't. Not that much. Paul is shedding tears here, and he's having real feelings for this. And he's giving some final advice. In verse 5, he goes, "I remember your genuine faith." We need to encourage each other in that. Mm-hmm. To go up to Lot and go, "Lot, I remember your genuine faith. Though you hesitated, you still went. Still faith. I remember your genuine faith." Rather than saying, "Stop doubting," isn't it better to say, "I remember your genuine faith"? If I could remember to say this differently,
Perception.
that's a building up rather than saying you failed. I remember your faith. And so he goes on. "For you share the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I know that same faith continues strong in you." He doesn't go, "Oh man, you little anxious person that keeps going back to focusing on fear. He goes, no, I recognize that you have faith. Regardless of whether or not you're struggling with fear or anxiety, but I know your faith. All of it is uplifting and encouraging. We can all learn from this. And how we build each other up in whatever circumstance. Rather than saying, man, you screwed up, you got yourself into it. Right? Have you heard that before from somebody? That's generally not helpful. And you're the one that forgot the lug wrench. Whatever. Have fun out there.
The chip on your shoulder, though.
Right. And so he's showing us an example of something better. In verse 6, he goes, this is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid hands on you. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and a sound mind.
That's true.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
And so listen to this. So he says he is giving you the power of a sound mind.
Amen.
I want you to take that to heart, because sometimes we're not sure our minds are sound. I feel that way about myself. Like when I have to ask Simona, what did I just say? Because I'm not sure if I'm remembering what it sounded like, and I hope it was the right thing. What was that I said? We're going to be a great old couple. We could probably sell tickets. Just wait, hold on.
Wonderful.
Isn't it awesome?
Amen.
A sound mind.
Amen. Change the body first and we will change the mind.
Think of how cloudy it gets when you're in fear.
And dark.
It gets real cloudy. Your things that would be easy to make a quick analysis of all of a sudden are hard. But by the power of God, He will give you clarity. And in that clarity, the self-discipline comes in, because in the clarity, then you can go, this is what I must do. God told me to go do this. And so now you can do it with confidence. Even if it seems nuts. Sometimes especially if it seems nuts. Because He doesn't always use what I would call traditional ways. Sometimes He works in a very mysterious way. In fact, the Bible says that.
Yes.
Let Him do a mysterious thing in your life. And we're all going to be afraid sometimes. We're all going to have anxiety. And I mean all of us will, because to say that we don't would mean that the enemy isn't interested in going after you anymore. Which we all know is not true. He's very interested in
He's
coming
very
after you.
crafty too. Very crafty.
So we're all going to have it. We're all going to experience it. We're all going to face it.
But the reward.
100%.